Hey everyone. Okay, so today I want to talk about conscious or deep breathing and why sometimes when you start doing that, it actually makes you feel worse, not better. Okay, so deep breathing or conscious breathing, for those of you who don't know what that means, is pretty self explanatory when it comes to the deep part. Basically, it just means very deeply breathing and out, right? And you hear about varying lengths. You hear about 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, or box breathing, where you 4 seconds in, you hold at the top, 4 seconds out, and then you hold at the bottom, 4 seconds in, etc. You hear about conscious breathing, and what that means is just you're consciously breathing versus just automatically breathing. So focusing on your breath, basically, is what that means. Okay, so there's all these different techniques for breathing, but something that's not discussed a lot, and I want to refer a great book about this is James Nestor, Breath. Okay, it's an awesome book. Actually, sorry, this is really unprofessional, but that's what it looks like. Yeah, okay, so great book on this. But basically, I want to talk about 4 reasons, and this is kind of broadly broken down, but 4 reasons why sometimes when you start breathing like this, you actually feel worse. Okay, so number one, I want to get this out of the way, is hyperventilation. Okay, so hyper being a lot, ventilation being breathing. Okay, so breathing too much or too fast. And so this is a real thing. Obviously, if you breathe really quick, or you've seen like the bag and stuff, right, when you're breathing in and out, you can faint if you breathe super fast, right? So getting that out of the equation, that is one reason, okay? Secondly, and a really common one, is that usually in our life we're not present. We're not living right here, right now, right? We're thinking about the past, we're worrying, we're ruminating, we're thinking about the future. We're not right here. And when we focus on our breath, especially when we focus on our breath and actually look at our body, it really brings us into the present moment. And so that can be scary, and that can be really vulnerable. It can feel weird, it can feel not good. It's not something we're used to often, for most of us. Okay, so that's one reason I would say, is that we're just not used to it, and it can be very vulnerable just being right here, and scary. I know when I first meditated the first time, like 12 years ago, I remember sitting there and I looked at my thumb, and I just stared at my thumb, and I would observe my thoughts, and I was less breath, but I was observing my thoughts, and all of a sudden I was like, I'm right here. And it was so scary because I didn't know what that felt like, to not think about the future and anxiety and all that. And so that's one reason emotionally you can feel. Secondly, physically when you're breathing, your body's acting like a piston. Okay, so that pumping motion when you breathe in, your diaphragm's like a dome like this, and it lowers. As you exhale, the diaphragm raises. And there's different thoughts on this, obviously, relative to the rest of the body. There's a lot of different thoughts on breathing mechanics, but the bottom line is usually people talk about the piston, diaphragm moving down, and then from the side, people talk about like a bucket handle motion, so you're actually breathing up. Your chest supposed to come up, almost like a bucket handle rises like this. Your ribs kind of move up and out, and they rotate a little bit. So all that being said, it's a lot of motion within the tissues. And so physically, it can start to release, in the sense of it where you can actually release emotions in the actual tissue. Okay, and so, and actually before I say emotions, even just physically, it can start to detox the area. A whole other conversation on blood flow, and I have a background in anatomy, and kinesiology, and so I used to teach gross anatomy in massage school, and basically blood flow works almost like a hose. It gets cut off, or it gets vasodilated, it's called. So basically blood flows into the area. You can imagine yourself cutting off a hose or opening it up. And where areas are tight and there's not much motion, usually there's a lack of blood flow. And so the byproducts of metabolism of all our millions, trillions of cells, they all give off byproducts, and they got to get flushed out. CO2 is one of them. There's a bunch of byproducts, but CO2 is a big one. And so these toxins and these various things have to get out of your body, right? Side note, when you breathe, when you hold your breath, why you actually need a breath is not because you need oxygen. It's actually because you have to get rid of carbon dioxide. I found that crazy cool. I read that in that book. And that was really interesting because I was like, wow, that's wild. So it actually has to get rid of the CO2. And so Anyway, side note there, but basically things can get stuck. So when you breathe, you start doing this deep conscious breathing, you start moving the area, you start getting blood flow in areas, you start detoxing this, and it can be this massive influx into your veins and your lymph system and all this of these physical aspects. So it's a healing thing, but you can feel it after. Sometimes you feel a headache, etc. So that's the third one. Fourth, and I mentioned it quickly, is emotionally. It can also bring up stuff. A lot of somatic, which means the body, techniques, breathing techniques, people in psychotherapy, counselors using these different techniques with the body. I've talked a lot about the tapping stuff. These various techniques are, they're really strong, and osteopathy in particular, that field of study talks a lot about emotions being held in the body, in the tissues. Science doesn't really know where emotions are. Like, we know how to think and long-term memory, etc., but where's the actual emotion held? The residue, I guess you could say. And so a lot of people believe strongly that it's actually in the tissues, and we know this, right? You know that when you stretch certain areas, sometimes it brings about memory, etc., whatever, right? And so when you start to breathe, like I talked about that piston motion, and you start getting that breath and that motion, it really can start to release emotions. It can bring up that traumatic event, and there's various muscles that really correspond deeply to emotions in the body. That's another conversation, but the psoas, PSOAS, is considered by many the most emotional muscle in the body. That's another topic, but that can be really powerful for fear, releasing fear and holding it too. But it's linked up to our breath because it connects into the back of our diaphragm muscle, the psoas muscle, fascially, which is the connective tissue. So anyway, I don't want to go too much on a side note. This is getting kind of long, but there's 4 reasons, okay? And just some reasons why you might be experiencing that. So go slow. Bottom line here is go slow, respect yourself, have compassion on your body, and understand that if you're starting to breathe deep and consciously, even just for a second, it'll get you back to center, which could be scary. It could be releasing these emotions and these stuck energies. And one other thing I mentioned here, well, the present aspect, and make sure you don't hyperventilate. Okay, I hope that helps, and all the best.